Good to see you this morning. And today's topic is, why is Moses not called by his given name? Moshe, probably the most famous character in the Torah and the Bible. Moshe is actually not his given name. Moses is not his given name. So what was his given name, and why is he not called by it? That's the question that we're going to answer today. And through the story of the Jewish people in Egypt, and through the story of Moshe's birth and early life, we will get the answer to this question together with some other interesting information at the same time. So here we go. So just to recap the story a little bit of what's going on and what is the backdrop where the story takes place. So the Jewish people find themselves in Egypt. First, they were in Egypt because life was good for them there. They were invited by Yosef, who was the viceroy of Egypt. So it started out as a good place to live, a place where they could be cared for, a place where they were comfortable. But the generation died out. Yosef died, his brothers died, and the new generation came about. And this new king forgot about Yosef. Different interpretations. What does it mean that he forgot Yosef? Some say that he purposely forgot Yosef. He made believe that he did not know of the contributions that Yosef made. But long story short, the Jewish people became slaves in Egypt. They were multiplying, they were having children, they were growing as a people, as a nation, and Pharaoh became very afraid of the Jewish people, and he said, maybe they'll grow to be so many, they'll grow to be so strong, and they'll drive us, the Egyptians, out of Egypt. So how to fix this problem? So they came up with a plan to enslave the Jewish people, and that's how they became slaves. It lasted for 86 years. 86 years. During this time, there were all kinds of decrees that Pharaoh made against the Jewish people. At some point, Pharaoh's stargazers told him that there's going to be a Jewish boy born, and this Jewish boy is going to be the savior and the redeemer of the Jewish people. So at that time, Pharaoh decreed that he ordered the midwives, their names were Shiphrah and Puah, I guess they were the main ones. He ordered them to kill all of the Jewish males as soon as they'd be born, in order that the redeemer of the Jewish people wouldn't survive to save the Jewish people and to free them. These two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, they were very special women, and they risked their lives to not only to not harm the Jewish babies, but in fact they cared for them and did whatever they could for them. So they were rewarded for this, and this was considered to be, a tremendous thing that they did. But when Pharaoh realized that the Jewish babies were surviving, so then he ordered his soldiers to take the Jewish boys by force and throw them into the Nile, throw them into the river. So this is how life was. Unfortunately, it was a terrible situation. There was a child born to a woman named Yocheved, who was married to Amram. The child was born 3 months early. The child was born premature. And so they were able to hide the baby for a little while, but the time came when she was expected to give birth, and they could no longer hide the baby. So the baby was taken, put into a basket, brought to the Nile, and the baby's sister Miriam sat there to watch what is going to happen. Short time later, the daughter of Pharaoh is taking a stroll along the Nile with her people. She notices this basket, and she reaches to take this basket to see what's inside. And in fact, the baby that was inside this basket was Moshe.
A man went from the house of Levi, and he took a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was good, and she hid him for 3 months. She could not hide him any longer, so she took for him a wicker basket and smeared it with clay and pitch. She placed the boy into it and placed it among the reeds at the bank of the river. His sister stationed herself at a distance to know what would be done with him. Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe by the river, and her maidens walked along the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her maidservant, and she took it. She opened it and saw him, the boy, and behold, a youth was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew boys." His sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and summon for you a wet nurse from the Hebrew women who will nurse the boy for you?" The daughter of Pharaoh said, "Go." The girl went and summoned the boy's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this boy and nurse him for me, and I will give you your pay." So the woman took the boy and nursed him. The boy grew up, and she brought him to the daughter of Pharaoh, and he was a son to her. She called his name Moses, as she said, "For I drew him from the water." So this is the story of Moshe's birth.
Pharaoh's daughter was taking a stroll along the water, and she saw the little basket, so she took the basket to see what was inside. She found Moshe, and she brought him to the palace, and she is the one who raised Moshe. And she named him Moshe, like the verse says, "Ki min hamayim mishitiu," because I drew him from the water. So the word Moshe means because I drew Moshe. That's his name, Moses. This is how he received the name. So it's actually not the name given to him by his parents, the name that Pharaoh's daughter gave to him. What was Moshe's given name? So if you look into the commentaries, there are about 10 different names that Moshe was given, not by his parents. Perhaps one of them was given by his parents, but different people named Moshe different names, and I'll give you a couple of examples. Now, none of these names could be found in the Torah, in the text. But if you look into the commentaries, you can find all of these various names, and I'll give you a couple of examples. One name that Moshe was called was Tuvia, which comes from the word tov, which means good, goodness. That's one name that Moshe got. Another name that Moshe received was Yekutiel. Yekutiel comes from the Hebrew word kaveh. I know it doesn't sound that way, but if you look at the letters, you have these two letters, the kuf and the vav, and it comes from the word kaveh, which means hope. And his mother, Yocheved, gave him this name, Hope, because it was her hope that the baby would be brought back to her and the baby would be saved. The Jewish people, not the family, but other Jewish people called him Shmaya. The root word of the name Shmaya is Shema, like to hear. And the Jewish people predicted that it would be in the days of Moshe that God would hear their prayers and save them from the slavery. So these are some of the names that Moshe received when he was born, but none of them could be found in the Torah. The only name that the Torah uses is Moshe, Moses. And in fact, this is the name that God uses to call Moshe. So this is very unusual. Why is it that Moshe is called by the name that Pharaoh's daughter gave to him? Not like he didn't have another name. There were at least 10 to choose from. So what is this all about? So one commentary answers the question and says that Moshe was called by this name as a reward to Pharaoh's daughter for saving him, saving his life and bringing him up, raising him in the palace. So this is not a small task, raising a child, and most importantly, she was one who saved him. So as a reward for this noble action that she took, so her name that she gave is the accepted name. So that's one answer that one commentary gives. But I think that if we look deeper into and find out more of the stories of Moshe's early life, we'll find out a deeper reason, a very fascinating, very fascinating chain of events where we could look at these different episodes that happened with Moshe, and we could understand from this, why he has this name Moshe. So let's look at what happens later in the story in Moshe's life, and then we'll get back to the names in just a bit. So many years pass. Moshe grows up in the palace. Some things happen, and at some point, Moshe is shepherding the sheep of his father-in-law Yisro, and suddenly he sees in the distance, he sees the burning bush. There's a bush burning, but there's a fire, and the bush is on fire, but the bush is not being consumed. So he goes to see what is this unusual sight, and that is when God starts speaking to him. God introduces himself to Moshe, and in the end he says, I want you to go to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh that, let my people go. So this was Moshe's task. He was tasked with confronting Pharaoh and demanding the release of the Jewish prisoners, of the Jewish slaves. Now, why was Moshe chosen to be the leader? Why was he the one chosen to take the Jews out of Egypt? What credentials did he have? We don't know very much about Moshe. We do know that he had a speech problem. He couldn't speak very well because of an injury he got to his mouth. So what were his credentials? Why was he chosen, in fact, to be the redeemer of the Jewish people at that time? So I'd like to share 3 episodes that the Torah shares. It's only these 3 episodes that we know about Moshe's early life. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see the screen. And we have it in the Hebrew and the English. And it says like this. Now it came to pass in those days that Moses grew up and went out to his brothers and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man of his brothers. Right, so Moshe was growing up in the palace. And finally, on the first day that he came out, actually the commentaries say that it was on this day that Moshe was put in charge of the entire house of Pharaoh. So he comes out on his first day to see what's going on, and this is what he sees. He sees the slavery. He sees that his brothers are burdened with all of this work. And he sees this Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man. So he turns this way and that way, and he saw that there was no man. So he struck the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. He went out on the second day, and behold, 2 Hebrew men were quarreling. And he said to the wicked one, why are you going to strike your friend? And he retorted, who made you a man, a prince, and a judge over us? Do you plan to slay me as you have slain the Egyptian? Moses became frightened and said, indeed, the matter has become known. Pharaoh heard of this incident, and he sought to slay Moses. So Moses fled from before Pharaoh. He stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the chief of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the trucks to water their father's flocks. But the shepherds came and drove them away. There was some kind of ban against against Yisro and his family because of another story that happened. So that's why when the other shepherds came, they drove away the daughters of Yisro. So Moses arose and rescued them and watered their flocks. So these are the stories that we see, that we know about Moshe, what happened to him in the days before God revealed himself to him and told him to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. What do we see from these stories? Moshe looked out and cared and did whatever he could for the victim, right? Now, in each of these three stories, first it goes from easy to more difficult. Perhaps not easy, but perhaps easier to more difficult, right? So in the first case, he saw an Egyptian hitting or attacking a Jewish slave, and so Moshe took action. So perhaps this is the easiest time to take action, even though this was not easy for Moshe at all, because if you think about it, Moshe was perhaps jeopardizing his position in the palace, his position as someone in Pharaoh's family, someone of power. So who was he siding with? He wasn't siding with the Egyptian soldier. He was siding with the Jewish slave. So he was putting himself in a very bad position. If you think about his career, and if you think about where he's coming from and what his future holds for him. But compared to these three episodes, in a way, this is the most difficult. This is the most easy place to make this choice of between the Egyptian and the Jew, because the Egyptian is the oppressor, the Jew is the victim. So it's very clear, we have the situation, who are you going to side with? Moshe decided to take a stand. He took a stand, and he saved the Jew by killing the Egyptian, actually. In the second case, there were two Jews fighting between themselves. So normally, you have two people fighting between themselves. It's easier to say, okay, they're fighting between themselves, let them figure it out. It's not like one is the oppressor and one is the victim. You could think two slaves fighting between themselves. Why should I get involved? So there's perhaps less of a reason for Moshe to get involved, but nevertheless, he does get involved, and he intervenes. He says, he says to the wicked one who was lifting his hand against his brother, he said, why are you lifting your hand against your brother? Why are you hitting him? In the third case, Moshe comes to a different city, and there's this local politics between all of the shepherds against the shepherds of Yisro and Yisro's daughters. And in this case, not only were people just fighting between themselves, but in this case, they were not even his people. He had nothing to do with them. But nevertheless, he intervened, right? So in the first case, in the first case, there's clearly an oppressor and a victim, and so as difficult as it is to take a stand, taking into account where Moshe is coming from, he actually does take a stand. But there's clearly an oppressor and a victim. In the second case, there are these two slaves fighting between themselves. So perhaps many people would say, this is not my business, let them figure it out. And certainly in the third case, where it's not even his own people, he comes to a new city, to a new place. He doesn't need to intervene in the local politics, but he does to look after someone who's being mistreated, or people who are being mistreated. He helps them, he saves them. So these are very, very powerful episodes, perhaps, where you see why Moshe was chosen. As when God saw Moshe's behavior, he understood that Moshe would be the right one to save the Jewish people and to be the leader of the Jewish people, because he knew that in Moshe, he found someone who would look after everyone, even in situations where it might not be comfortable to stand up for them, and even in situations where many people would just not get involved because it has nothing to do with them. Moshe was not that way. Moshe went out of his way, and he put in jeopardy everything that he had, and he intervened and got involved in situations even when most people would probably not get involved. So where did Moshe get this from? Why did Moshe behave this way? Where did this come from?
His mom.
The answer is the one who raised him, Pharaoh's daughter.
That's how could that have been, Rabbi Abi?
So
Because,
let's see what happened.
Yeah.
Let's see what happened. How was Moshe saved? Moshe was a Jewish baby who was supposed to be killed by Pharaoh's soldiers. He was placed in a basket and he was on the river. And Pharaoh's daughter, who's walking along, sees this basket. She knows that this is a Jewish child. Only Jewish kids have to be hidden like that. And she has a choice. She could either take the child or just leave him. And perhaps the easier thing, certainly the easier thing to do would be just to ignore it, to keep walking. And you don't have to, she wouldn't have to deal with this problem on her hands. But she doesn't do that. She doesn't ignore it and keep walking. She stops. She gets the basket. She sees, she understands that it's a Jewish child. And nevertheless, even though she knew who she was, she's the daughter of Pharaoh, and she knows who the child is. The child is a Jewish child. She goes out of her way and she perhaps jeopardizes her position to bring Moshe home and to raise Moshe as her own. So what did she do? She looked out for the victim. She found this Jewish baby and she decided to save him, even though it would cause difficulty for her, even though it would perhaps jeopardize her position in the palace, her position in the family. She did it anyways because it was the right thing to do. And then she named him, Ki min hamayim mishitiu, because I drew him from the water. So Moshe received this. This is the education that he received from the person who raised him, his stepmother, if you will. Not only did she take this action at that time, but she called him by this name. And you know, any name that you get, you always hear the backstory. Many times throughout your childhood, you know, it's the name that you carry has meaning, and it's explained to you probably. And we could be sure that Pharaoh's daughter, who was raising Moshe, raised Moshe with these values and these principles, so much so that she put it into his name. His name is Ki min hamayim mishitiu, because I drew him from the water. So always expressing how she saved him from the water. She saved him from the water. This is the right thing to do. This is how one should behave. So perhaps Moshe received this education from the person who raised him, from Pharaoh's daughter. Now, for those of you who know Hebrew, you'll know that Moshe is not really the correct name for this story, right? If you want to say Ki min hamayim mishitiu, if you want to say this is your name because I drew you from the water, the name for drawing, I drew you in the past tense, is not Moshe. It should be Mashui. You were drawn because I drew you. Mashui, you are the one who was drawn, right? So in the Hebrew, it should say it in the past tense. But Moses is not that. Moshe means like in the future, Moshe means like to draw someone from the water, to pull, to draw. But if the reason Moshe received the name is because he was drawn from the water in the past tense, then it should say Mashui, he was drawn, Mashui. So instead of Moshe, it should be Mashui. Why is the name in fact Moshe? And the answer is that this was the education that Pharaoh's daughter was giving to Moshe. She was saying, I drew you from the water. I drew you from the water, but you should know, you should understand the value And you should understand that looking out for the victim and helping a person when you have the ability to is so important, and is such a noble thing to do. So what she was saying was, you will draw others because I drew you. So the name Moshe is that you will draw. She was teaching Moshe that he should and he will draw others just like she drew him from the water. So that's why he has the name Moshe in the future tense, that he will draw, even though the name was recording the story of how Moshe was saved because he was drawn. What she was saying was, you will draw others because I drew you. This is the story of Moshe. This is why he received the name Moshe. It's because Pharaoh's daughter saved him. Not only that, we could see that in all of the episodes that happened in Moshe's life, he always stood up for the victim. He always stood up for the person who needed help, even if it would jeopardize his position, even if it would make his life difficult, and it did. Pharaoh tried to punish him, and it was very difficult for Moshe. But this is what he did at every opportunity. Moshe stood up for the person who needed help, and this he learned from the person who raised him. She was saying, "You will draw others because I drew you." That's the name Moshe. Moshe in the future tense, you will draw others, and in fact, Moshe redeemed the Jewish people from Egypt, from the hands of Pharaoh.